History is often told through grand battles and sweeping movements of armies. But sometimes it's a duel between two brilliant minds that truly shapes the course of a war. Today, we're diving into one of World War II's most grueling and fascinating chapters, the Italian campaign. This wasn't just a fight for territory. It was a high-stakes strategic showdown between two titans, the unyielding British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, and the legendary German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Let's set the stage. It's mid-1943. The Allies, fresh off their victory in North Africa, are at a crossroads. Where to strike next? The Americans, led by figures like General George Marshall, were adamant about a direct cross-channel invasion of France. What would become D-Day. They saw it as the quickest, most decisive way to end the war. But Winston Churchill had a different vision. He looked at the map and saw what he famously called Europe's soft underbelly, Italy. Churchill was a master of grand strategy, but also a man haunted by the ghosts of World War I. He remembered the horrific, static trench warfare of the Western Front and was determined to avoid a repeat. He argued that an invasion of Italy would be a strategic masterstroke, would knock a key Axis partner out of the war, open up the Mediterranean to Allied shipping, and force Germany to divert precious troops and resources away from the Eastern Front and from defending France. It was a plan of attrition, of flanking, of hitting the enemy where they were weakest. So, on July 10, 1943, Operation Husky was launched. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Sicily. The initial invasion was a resounding success. Within weeks, Sicily fell, and the shockwaves were felt all the way in Rome. Mussolini's fascist regime crumbled, and he was deposed and arrested. Italy, Churchill's first domino, had toppled. It seemed his soft underbelly strategy was paying off brilliantly. The path to Rome looked clear. But Churchill and the Allies had overlooked one crucial factor: Germany's reaction. And Germany's reaction had a name: Erwin Rommel. Hitler was furious at Italy's collapse. He couldn't afford to lose his southern flank. He needed a firefighter, someone who could salvage the situation and turn Italy from a soft underbelly into a fortress. He sent his best man for the job. Rommel, despite his fame as a master of mobile desert warfare, was tasked with creating a static, unyielding defense. The hunter was being asked to become the hunted's guardian. As Allied troops landed on the Italian mainland in September 1943, they didn't find the easy march they expected. They found the Wehrmacht. Rommel, with typical efficiency, began disarming Italian troops and establishing a series of formidable defensive lines across the peninsula's mountainous spine. The Italian terrain was a defender's dream and an attacker's nightmare. Steep mountains, narrow valleys, and rivers that turned into raging torrents in the winter rain. It was the perfect landscape for a bloody, grinding war of attrition, exactly what Churchill had hoped to avoid. Rommel's plan was simple and brutal: make the Allies pay for every single inch of ground. He envisioned a series of fallback positions, starting with the Volturno Line, then the Barber Line, and culminating in the truly formidable Gustav Line. This main line was anchored on the seemingly impregnable monastery of Monte Cassino, which offered a commanding view of the Liri Valley, the main route to Rome. For the Allied soldiers on the ground, Churchill's grand strategic vision felt very different. The soft underbelly turned out to be, as American General Mark Clark bitterly remarked, one tough old gut. The fighting was hellish. Men fought and died for small hills and nameless villages. The advance slowed to a crawl, measured in yards, not miles. The winter of 1943-1944 was particularly brutal, with soldiers battling not just the Germans, but also mud, snow, and freezing rain. Meanwhile, the strategic debate raged on. The Americans grew increasingly impatient, seeing Italy as a costly diversion from the main event, the invasion of France. But Churchill was resolute. He pushed for more resources, more audacious plans to break the stalemate. This led to the Anzio landings in January 1944, an ambitious amphibious operation designed to outflank the Gustav Line and seize Rome quickly. It was a classic Churchillian gamble. But the gamble didn't quite pay off. Instead of a swift breakout, the forces at Anzio were quickly contained by the Germans, creating another static and bloody beachhead. The Allies were now fighting two desperate battles, one at Anzio and another against the Gustav Line at Cassino. The battle for Monte Cassino would become one of the most infamous of the war, a brutal slog that took 4 major assaults and months to finally overcome. But here's a twist in our duel. Just as the Italian front became a quagmire, Rommel was reassigned. In late 1943, Hitler, now convinced the main Allied threat was a cross-channel invasion, moved Rommel to France to prepare the Atlantic Wall defenses. While his defensive blueprint for Italy remained, the Desert Fox himself was no longer commanding the board. His successor, General Kesselring, proved to be an equally tenacious and skillful defensive commander, continuing to bleed the Allies dry. Finally, in May 1944, the Allies broke through. After a massive coordinated offensive, the Gustav Line shattered, and the forces at Anzio finally broke out. On June 4, 1944, Allied troops entered Rome. It was a major victory, a moment of triumph. But its thunder was stolen just 2 days later. On June 6, 1944, D-Day happened. The world's attention shifted decisively to Normandy. Italy became a secondary front. The campaign continued, a long, hard fight up the rest of the peninsula, but it was now in the shadow of the main effort in France. So, who won the duel? It's not a simple answer. Churchill achieved his initial goals. Italy was knocked out of the war, and significant German divisions were tied down, unable to be in Normandy on D-Day. From a grand strategic perspective, it was a success, but the cost was immense. The Italian campaign was one of the longest and bloodiest of the war for the Western Allies, with over 300,000 casualties. The soft underbelly proved to be anything but. For the soldiers who fought there, it was a relentless, brutal grind. And what of Rommel? His defensive strategy in Italy was terrifyingly effective. He turned the geography into a weapon, inflicting maximum delay and casualties on a superior force. He proved he was more than just a master of desert warfare. He was one of the greatest defensive minds of the war. The Italian campaign remains a powerful lesson in strategy. It shows that even the most brilliant plans can meet unexpected resistance, and that the reality on the ground can be far more complex and brutal than the lines drawn on a map in a war room. It was a duel between Churchill's strategic vision and Rommel's tactical genius, fought by brave soldiers in the mud and mountains of Italy. By June 1944, the Italian campaign had become a theater of mirages. Successes were measured in villages captured only to be lost again when rain turned mountain roads into rivers. The Allies were learning that Italy, far from the soft underbelly Churchill promised, was a spine of granite. Through this punishing geography moved a figure who seemed to preside over its difficulties. Like a spirit of warfare itself, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. His ability to vanish before encirclement had transformed him from mere opponent to obsession. For Churchill, every dispatch reporting enemy withdrawal in good order felt like an insult delivered personally by the Desert Fox. In London, cabinet meetings opened with questions about Rome, but ended in discussions about Rommel's whereabouts. Intelligence officers brought new maps each week, tracing the Marshal's possible positions north of the Arno River. They might as well have been studying the flight of a hawk. Intercepted messages revealed patterns that dissolved once acted upon. Allied planners called these deceptions smokescreens. But among field officers, the phrase Rommel's fog became shorthand for confusion itself. Inside Allied headquarters at Caserta, Generals Alexander and Clark wrestled with logistics while also managing the Prime Minister's impatience. Churchill's cables arrived scrawled with red underlines and question marks. "Does Rommel yet bleed?" one telegram demanded. Another ended with a line that haunted his subordinates. "We must clip the tail that whips us." Its rhetoric turned battle into metaphor, but the men on the ground faced the literal weight of attrition. When Rome finally fell on the 4th of June, 1944, celebrations briefly masked the exhaustion. Cameras captured troops kissing civilians in liberated streets. Yet those who read the internal reports knew that the German army had retreated deliberately, leaving booby traps for pursuit. Rommel had structured the withdrawal to preserve strength, not morale. His divisions melted north toward the Gothic line exactly as he intended, buying time for Germany's heartlands to fortify. Churchill saw through the facade of victory. "We have liberated stones and churches," he told Eden grimly, "but not yet broken the hand that holds the dagger." Within weeks, the focus of world attention shifted to Normandy. D-Day eclipsed the Mediterranean struggle and left Churchill isolated in his pride. Eisenhower, now the architect of liberation, commanded the headlines. To compensate, Churchill poured energy into the Italian front's remaining drama, the hunt for Rommel. Reports suggested that the Desert Fox, though occasionally overruled by Hitler's whims, continued advising German units in Italy. Some believed he controlled both Italian and southern French defenses in a vast web of coordination. True or not, Churchill's staff fed his belief that Rommel lingered in the hills, orchestrating Allied frustration by telephone and memory. The clash moved beyond tactics into psychology. For Rommel, Italy served as defensive schoolhouse, each valley another lesson in how to delay the inevitable. For Churchill, it was becoming a test of reputation. He had convinced Roosevelt to prioritize the Mediterranean door. Now the Normandy triumph threatened to repaint that door as a detour. If he could claim final victory by capturing Rommel or at least defeating his legend, the narrative might yet bend back in his favor. "Bring me good news from Italy," he implored Alexander in July, "something the world can toast before the headlines freeze around France." Good news refused to come. Instead, Allied intelligence kept reporting that German countermoves seemed anticipatory, as though the enemy had advance notice of assaults. Spies within Rome's wreckage hinted at leaks through neutral embassies. British operatives codenamed Seafarer and Dowry traced transmissions from the Balkans, describing Allied timetables. Everything pointed to an active espionage game running beneath the Italian front. Each week that Rommel's troops escaped another envelopment, Churchill's suspicion of traitorous whispers deepened. One dramatic episode unfolded at Lake Trasimene. British 8th Army forces attempted to perform a sweeping movement south to close around a German corps believed to contain Rommel's mobile command. The plan relied on surprise, but an intercepted enemy message before dawn used the cryptic phrase, "Switch to alternate foxhole." When Allied units reached the designated trap site, they found open fields, smoldering supply dumps, and tire tracks pointing north. In London, Churchill threw his brief over a chair. "Once more, the fox digs elsewhere," he roared. Nearby secretaries froze in place. Yet even his anger carried grudging acknowledgement. "He has the mind of a poet," Churchill conceded later. "He writes his war in disappearing ink." That sentence revealed a complicated admiration, but it did not soften his resolve. He demanded an intensified deception campaign, a battle of illusions against the master of illusion. The Special Operations Executive flooded Italy with misinformation. Radio operators transmitted fake invasion codes. Counterfeit orders were leaked through double agents, suggesting a coming thrust toward Yugoslavia. The scheme worked too well. It tangled Allied logistics while Rommel responded cautiously, conserving strength yet again. Churchill's attempt to outfox the fox resembled chasing a reflection in water. Through that summer, the Prime Minister's telephone calls became rituals of fury. Combining whiskey, fatigue, and theatrical flair, he would pace across Downing Street's map room, muttering toward the nearest officer on duty. "He breathes our thoughts before we think them," he said one night. Have the gods shielded him personally, or have we staffed our armies with his admirers? When advisors reminded him that Rommel now had limited influence, Berlin's high command often bypassed him. Churchill dismissed the claim as wishful. "Until he's in our custody," he replied, "his influence walks the earth." By late August, Allied advances in northern Italy stalled before the Gothic line. Autumn storms and minefields turned every mile into misery. Churchill flew to Naples for a face-to-face review. Eyewitnesses describe his arrival at the villa headquarters. Hat tilted forward, cigar clenched, eyes alight with both charm and menace. Generals crowded around the map laid on a trestle table. Churchill jabbed at the red pins marking Rommel's reported positions. "There," he thundered. "We net him there. He slides through there, and presently he appears there as a ghost. Are these troops fishermen or scholars of fish?" Alexander attempted calm explanation about weather, alpine passes, and overextended supply lines. Churchill's retort cut through the room. "We shall not excuse ourselves with clouds and crags while one man commands an empire of delay." Then, abruptly, the storm in him subsided. He exhaled smoke like surrender and whispered, "Still, I'd rather fight a genius than a fool." The remark, recorded by a stenographer, drew faint laughter, ending the conference in weary truce. A week later came unexpected news. Hitler had recalled Rommel to France to manage defenses against the Allied Western Front. The Desert Fox was leaving Italy not because he had been trapped, but because higher chaos required him elsewhere. Churchill received a message while breakfasting. He lowered his newspaper and murmured, "The fox has left the henhouse of his own accord." One aide expected a sigh of relief. Instead, Churchill frowned. "He will likely blight their hopes there as well," he said. "Our fortune is to chase him forever from map to map." Indeed. The next reports from France described Rommel organizing coastal defenses before D-Day and later commanding against Allied forces in Normandy until treachery within Hitler's circle doomed him. When rumors reached London of Rommel's forced suicide after the July plot, Churchill's first reaction was silence. Then he stood, removed his bowler, and said softly, "One must honor courage, even the enemy's breed." To the House of Commons, he later stated, "He was a soldier of capacity and daring. Fate made him our foe. Respect shall make him remembered." Privately, however, the frustration never fully cooled. Diaries of his wartime secretary record him gazing at Italian campaign maps months later, tracing old encirclement arrows that had failed. "We had him here," she quoted him saying. And he slipped as if mountains moved for him. Then came his characteristic pivot to philosophy, but Italy was lesson, not loss. We learned from our foxes. By the war's end, when victory finally crowned his leadership, Churchill understood how Rommel's escapes had shaped his own legend. The pursuit revealed the limits of command, the unpredictability of brilliance, and the futility of rage. In 1945, he toured Cassino's ruins, now peaceful under spring light. Standing amid collapsed walls, he removed his hat. Reporters waited for the standard triumphal speech. Instead, he told them quietly, "This hill once hid a hand that guided shadows. He is gone now, and so to the shadows." Later aboard his aircraft home, he turned to his military aide, half amused, half melancholic. "We did not capture the fox," he said, swirling whiskey in a glass, "but we taught the hounds endurance." Those words summed up his private conclusion that leadership's test lies not only in winning, but in persisting when victory refuses to appear. Back in London, he resumed peacetime duties while enduring political fatigue that soon cost him office. Yet mention of Rommel could still ignite his eyes. In his memoirs, he wrote a single line about the Italian pursuit: "The desert fox slipped our snares, but in fleeing showed us that art of war is art indeed." It was the closest he ever came to confession that admiration had outlived enmity. The legend of their duel persisted beyond both men. Historians studying the campaign debate whether Rommel personally directed each escape or merely inspired, disciplined subordinates. What remains certain is the psychological theater crafted inadvertently between them. one chasing vindication across continents, the other defending professionalism within disaster. Churchill's frustrated rant, as aides later called his moment in Naples, became shorthand for human dimension inside grand strategy. It revealed he could rage like any soldier denied satisfaction, but also reflect like a statesman recognizing his adversary's worth. In that fusion lay his greatness, and his fatigue. So the story closed as twilight on war approached. The fox dead, the hunter wise, and Italy finally opened for peace. The ruins of Cassino stood silent, while wildflowers rooted among shell fragments. And perhaps somewhere in memory, the echo of a voice lingered, half admiration, half lament. The desert fox slips again. History would remember both sentence and speaker. Two men bound in rivalry across the smoke of a shattered peninsula, each measuring bravery through the eyes of the other.